Good evening and welcome to this special edition of Trending Tonight. I'm Sanjay Singh, broadcasting live from what was the epicenter of yet another protest in the national capital. Delhi has a history. Even before we assumed independence, Delhi was always known as the epicenter of all the protests in this country. Whenever anything happened anywhere in this country, there will be a protest in the national capital. And it all begins in recent public memory right here on Jantar Mantar. Who can forget 2011, the Anna agitation that began from here, the Nirbhaya agitation which also took its roots right here, and now this. So then there is an important question. While protests have turned violent in some parts of the country against the CAA, that is the Citizenship Amendment Act, as well as the NRC, and we get you these pictures of the protests turning ugly and violent, and nobody in his right mind can ever justify these violent protests, especially when they become so brutal like they did in the case of Jamia, then in Selampur, and now in Lucknow, even in Ahmedabad, needs to be condemned. Police action is required immediately to put the perpetrators to book. But on the other hand, we should not lose focus that protests in other parts of the country, despite the fact that there was Section 144 imposed, that is a complete clampdown by the administration, perhaps to their justification to quell any form of violence, these protests were largely peaceful. And one such protest was right here in the national capital at Jantar Mantar, went off peacefully. Some agitation towards the end, but that also was managed peacefully by the police as well as the protesters. But how should we look at this agitation going forward against the CAA and the NRC? Will these protests, which are now also a protest not just led by political parties, but the youth in various universities, all over the country we saw university students, college students outside on the roads protesting against this government's decision. How should this be looked at? Will these protests continue peacefully, I might add, or will this peter out or phase out and it will be accepted by the people of this country? All that and much more on this action-packed edition of Trending Tonight. But first, let's begin with this exclusive interview with Yogendra Yadav, who too was detained and then released. He spoke to me just a short while ago and he had an interesting proposition for the government. You want to bring in NRC, that is a National Register of Citizens? Why don't you go ahead and make a National Register for the Unemployed, an NRU if you were? Let's quickly play out this conversation. Joining me right now is Mr. Yogendra Yadav. You were briefly detained by the police also because you were in violation of Section 144, which was imposed. But Mr. Yadav, the fact that people gathered here, the fact that the protest was allowed despite Section 144, we have to keep in account both these things. I want to understand from you, how do you look at the events of the past few weeks where protests are breaking out almost simultaneously across the country?
Specifically speaking about protest against this particular act, Sanket, I would say today was the turning point. It was a turning point because what was episodic protests restricted to a region or to a religion suddenly became a nationwide protest. The Northeast protested, everyone thought it's something about Assam. Then people said, well, it's only the Muslims. Today, it's not one region, not one religion. It's country which comes out, and it is not directed by any political party, any set of organizations. This spontaneous upsurge. What is so striking about it is that it has fused with the youth movement. The campus protests that we have seen are very, very unusual. I refuse to believe that it's merely a response to Jamia police lathi charge and police atrocities. I think something is simmering in our campuses. It's been bottled for quite long. That is bursting out. Similarly with minorities, especially with Muslims, they have been uncomfortable for quite some time. Lynching, Supreme Court verdict, all kinds of things happen. Suddenly, CAB provided that one moment when everything comes out. So we have simultaneous coming out of two energies, youth movement and a protest by minorities. The question is, can this be brought together? Can this be taken to a positive direction? These are the challenges for times to come.
So you agree that this is going to be a challenge, the longevity of a protest like this? Now, Mr. Yadav, one more thing. You have the fortune of being part of an earlier protest also, which incidentally began right here at Jantar Mantar. At that time also, it was a pressure cooker situation, and corruption and Lokpal became that one issue where the nation rallied behind you. Do you think that this is exactly that moment for Modi 2.0? What was there in UPA 2.0, what Lokpal was for UPA 2.0, CAA is for Modi 2.0?
Not just CAA, I would say that two pressure cooker situations, as you rightly put it. One is, of course, of the minorities who have had a very, very tough time, have been practically relegated to a second-class citizenship, who've been very unhappy with it and have been waiting for an opportunity to say it. On the other hand, there is unemployment. We forget what is the rate of unemployment in this country. It's crossed 9%. Among the educated, it is almost 20% and above. This kind of unemployment leads to street riots all over the world. So it's the unemployment situation which is breaking loose. And to my mind, the Jamia protest, the trigger was Jamia, but some of the underlying reasons have to do with unemployment and the state of our quality of education.
My last question. Now, we have seen that protests have turned violent. It turned violent in Jamia, which led to a protest, which also turned violent because of the police, and that was questioned. It turned violent in Selampur, and if I were to play the devil's advocate, I would say that this would be a strange predicament of the government. If you damned if you do and damned if you don't. If you don't impose Section 144, then you will be held accountable for the violence. But if you do impose, then you will come across as obstructionist, not allowing people their legitimate right to protest. Where does the fine line lie?
Sanket, I don't know whether I agree with you, because when violence takes place, I want to ask two questions. One, is this movement predominantly violent? Two, is the leadership justifying violence? These are the critical things. In this case, violent incidents have taken place. No one has justified them. And two, violent incidents, compared to the scale of the movement, the violence is minuscule, should be controlled, should be punished. But do we know, yesterday in Mewat, under our nose, Delhi's nose, 1 lakh people walked for 8 kilometers to protest against CAB? Did we cover it? Most channels did not. If there was violence, we would have covered it definitely. Isn't that a double bind? Damned if you do, damned if you don't. If there is violence, then you are damned. If there is no violence, you are invisible. I think we also owe something. We owe to cover the movement in its full dimensions. Every violence must be spotted, must be analyzed, must be held accountable. But we must underline the fact that such an emotive issue, which has brought the kind of people this country has not seen for years, the scale of violence is truly minuscule. And the moment it has happened, everyone has said, no, condemn it, we don't want to support it. That to me shows the future of the movement, and therefore I would not call this movement violent, and therefore I would not, in a sense, erase the point of this movement under the garb of violence.
Okay, joining us at this moment are two political analysts, Geeta Bhatt as well as Tehseen Poonawalla, with me at Jantar Mantar while we are battling the cold. Ms. Geeta Bhatt has the fortune that she's ensconced in the comfort of her house. So, Ms. Geeta Bhatt, I'm going to come to you after a short while. Have mercy on us. Tehseen, to you first, right? This protest took place. Protests have been turning violent, which is a cause of concern. Understand the predicament of a government. You cannot allow a protest to turn violent because the onus will be on you. Why did you allow it to turn violent? This one, though, was peaceful. Where does this leave this agitation, this protest? Do you think that it has in it to ensure longevity, to sustain the campaign?
Sanket, yes, this protest does have it in it, because this protest is not going to stop. And I'm one of the people who've been pioneering it everywhere, from the Supreme Court to the streets to social media, until and unless this bill is either called back by the government, this act, it's withdrawn, or the Supreme Court strikes it down. This will lead into the issue that we want to go into is economy, which this government does not want to talk about or speak about, because this Hindu-Muslim divide benefits this government. Coming to the second part of the violence, you're here today, there was no violence. All of us were here today.
But there was violence in Lucknow. There was violence in Ahmedabad.
Why is there violence where there's BJP government and BJP police? Who benefits from it? A.
Oh, that's an allegation. You're saying that BJP is getting this done.
Absolutely, and I'll prove it. In Jamia, all news channels ran that the Jamia students were involved in arson. Ultimately, Delhi police had to come out and say they were outsiders. Now, who benefits from a Hindu-Muslim polarization? Who benefits when I am in a biting cold with Sanket Upadhyay, not discussing the economy, not discussing joblessness, but discussing Hindu-Muslim? Only the BJP, the Yale University proves it, the United Nations prove it, and the BJP wants it to be divided on Hindu-Muslim rather than economy.
That's a serious allegation. I have to get in Geeta Bhatt. Geeta Bhatt, this is an allegation, unsubstantiated, so I'm not going to make this allegation. Tehseen he's saying that you stand to benefit when there is violence and there is a bad name to the protests and you are a direct beneficiary. Thus, he implies that the BJP is behind it.
Well, Sanket, I just heard Mr. Yogendra Yadav also, whom you were interviewing. I mean, how in such a subtle manner, how he justified the violence that has taken place at some places, and what Tehseen ji is saying. You see, time and again this is being brought that in the Jamia campus, the police had entered, not pointing out that who were these outsiders. They went inside the campus. They are the ones who had created a ruckus, and from where also big stones had come, which were thrown on the policemen. There were 2 policemen who went to the ICU. There are many other who were injured in it. And wasn't it the responsibility of those students who were protesting and were inside, they must have seen that these outsiders have come inside. They must have known that these are not a part of our campus. Why they did not go out and hand them over, saying that we are not a part of this, this violence, and please take them away from here. Nothing like this happened. So you see, and there is much
Geeta,
more
but
to
you're putting the onus on the students.
No, it is important. It is important if you are, each one of them, since is a university student, is 18 years and above, has a right to vote, has a right to choose the government. So they also have a responsibility.
Okay, Geeta, but
they also have certain duty.
Fine. I understand the point that you're making, but let's not lose focus of the larger picture. Yeah.
Yes, I'm coming to that also.
Yeah.
And the point is that, you see, where is it? It is a very well orchestrated, very nefarious campaign that is being organized at places. There are pamphlets which are being distributed. People are being told that they are going to lose their citizenship, which is totally wrong. You also know it very well. I also know, and Tehseen ji also knows it, that this particular act has nothing to do with Indian citizens.
Okay, 2 things.
We all know it
Geeta,
very
but
well,
2 things.
No
2 things very quickly.
Talk about it.
No, I've
Mr.
understood
Yogendra
this
Yadav
point.
doesn't
We have
want
heard
to
this
talk
point.
about
2
it.
things very
And
quickly.
none of the other politicians,
2 things very
including
quickly.
the
Then in
communist
that
leadership.
case, number one, are you trying to say that all the students who are protesting all over the country in various universities, not just in India but abroad as well, are all motivated? Number one. And number 2, a fundamental question. When you say that these students are being egged on, they're being given a theory and being provoked, then is this an admission that the government has not been able to convince people that this bill means no harm?
Well, Sanket, first of all, when you talk about that people even abroad are supporting, I also read a similar news where it was talked about with reference to Howard University. And it is very interesting to note that not even 100 people signed a petition supporting an against movement against the Citizenship Act, while in Howard there are more than 20,000 students who study. So, trying to portray it that as if all the students from universities
Indian
across
universities,
the country,
Indian students.
There are 800
across
universities in India. Sanket, there are 800 universities in India, almost 800, and this is just in 4 or 5 where this kind of a big campaign took place against the act.
And the second point, did you fail in your messaging? If you feel that someone else's narrative is gaining traction, then are you trying to say that a government which champions the cause of or champions the art of communicating has failed in propagating their theory?
Could have been there could be a possibility that it could not be foreseen that such kind of a orchestrated campaign and this kind of a violence leading to violence would be done by people who somehow do not want who are going against the country, because this is not something which has been imposed. The parliament with a due process with thorough deliberations has passed
Ms. Geeta Bhatt says that yes, so deliberations have begun. Geeta Bhatt says that the government could not anticipate that some people will use this to a political advantage and will try to divide people, divisive. Whereas this bill is nothing about religion and division.
Well, it is the Honorable Home Minister Shri Amit Shah sir who said that first CAB, now CA will be brought in, then NRC will be brought in, not just limited to Bengal but the rest of the country. That's he. He said both should be looked together. It's his words in Bengal. Number two, has the Honorable Supreme Court also decided to divide people? Because I'm one of the petitioners. The Honorable Supreme Court within 2 seconds gave a notice. The AG kept saying don't give a notice. It gave a notice. Point number three, today there were thousands of students here, a lot of students with me. Are all of them have not understood the act, the bill? I mean, are you trying to say that nobody's understood the bill? Nobody can see the polarization. This bill is against Article 14, Article 15, read with Article 21.
So you're saying that it's not that people have not understood the bill, it's that they've understood it too well to know what the fault is.
Everybody understands that the real intention of the BJP is the Hindu-Muslim divide so as to not answer on the economy. That's it.
Geeta Bhatt as well as Tehseen Poonawalla, many thanks for joining us for a short discussion. I also spoke to Congress leader Sandeep Dixit. Let's play out that interview. If you were to, for one moment, play the devil's advocate and understood their predicament, if you do not take precaution in protests, then there is the risk of it turning violent, as it has happened, right? If you do take precautions, then it will be seen as draconian, like imposition of Section 144. Would you be sympathetic?
No, I have no problem in government trying to be extra careful that violence does not happen. And unfortunately, in some cases, violence does take place when people come out.
For instance, in Lucknow today.
Yeah, in Lucknow today or in Jamia 2 days ago, and that has been done by local political people. And in that, if government wants to find out who those people are and punish them, I think we are fully in support. But that does not mean that the legitimate rights of protest are stopped, right? These very people must remember that during the Nirbhaya incident in this very place, during the India against corruption in this very place, when the entire RSS was involved in the organization, you did exactly the same thing. I think they did a damn good job as being in the opposition. And I don't grudge the opposition when they protest against them. That's what the job of the opposition is. And as far as I'm concerned, the only job of the opposition in this whole world is to oppose, and to oppose effectively and as strongly as you can. And I very often say that, one of the things I admire about Modi was that he was a great opposition leader because he opposed everything we did. And everything we did, even if it was in national interest, later on he did and tried to gain credit for it. But I think let's give him credit for the fact that he was a good politician. Okay. But fact is that when we do the same thing, nobody can grudge us that and nobody can take that away from us. Okay. So I think government is stuck. I don't think government is stuck because it wants to control this crowd. I think government is stuck because the sinister move of the government and the plan of the government is unraveling in front of people. That is their problem.
So a whole host of opposition leaders have spoken today. In fact, there was a criticism that came in from one of the students right here whom I had the fortune of speaking. And they said that we start the movement. It's the students who have carried forward this movement. They have played the role of the opposition. Opposition just loves to pillion ride on what the students have started. So I spoke to a number of these opposition leaders, in some cases asked them this question also. Here's my interaction with Sitaram Yechury of the CPM. Mr. Yechury, how do you respond to the government deciding to impose Section 144 in many parts of the country? For instance, in Uttar Pradesh, the entire state is under Section 144. That means any congregation of more than 4 people is illegal. Is the intention to bring about peace?
I know that. I know. I mean, that's what we were told. It is an intention clearly to quell dissent. This government doesn't want any dissenting voice to be heard. And this is a very, 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 very major authoritarian attack on a sort of a totalitarian state that is being created. And it's not only in Uttar Pradesh, but in most of the BJP ruled states, this is the situation. Section 144 is imposed, and we were told in the morning when we collected at Mandi House that we have imposed Section 144 and therefore your assembly here is illegal. And on that basis, we were all hauled up into the buses forcibly and taken away. This is anti-democratic. This is not allowing my fundamental right to peacefully protest, which is being taken away by this government in a very, very totalitarian manner.
No, but then, you know, Mr. Yechury, if you were to listen to the government's argument, they say that there were protests that were taking place in Jamia, in Selampur, and then they turned violent. Now, who was behind it? Were they outsiders? Were they politically inclined? But the point is, violence happened. In the case of Selampur, you had little children who were witness to stone pelting. So, if the onus is on them to ensure peace, then they want to do it whatever it takes.
Yeah, but this is not the way to do it. You can't ensure peace by quelling dissent, peaceful dissent. If you quell peaceful dissent, then it will only create more trouble and more protests in the future. And whoever wants to misuse the situation can misuse it, like it happened in Jamia. The police has filed 10 FIRs, and not a single student is named in those FIRs. And why were the students denied protection by the Delhi High Court today?
I want to ask you another question now, this time not about the student protest, but now I believe I'm getting information that Amit Shah is chairing a meeting where he's trying to figure out the law and order situation all over the country in the wake of these protests. I want to know from you, did the government in a way fail to read the public anger or the backlash as far as CAB and NRC is concerned? Did they fail to read or did they misread?
No, it has failed. It has failed. It thought that it was so arrogant that it thought that whatever they do will be accepted by the people. That is not the case. The people have very clearly expressed their dissent, and they've come out clearly saying that they are against this amendment, against the manner in which our Indian constitution is being violated, and violated by people who are under oath of this very constitution to govern this country. And this is something which the government obviously did not really understand what is the public mood. And the public mood is that it will not allow anybody to disfigure the secular democratic Indian Republic as enshrined in our constitution.
Protests have turned violent in Lucknow, where media vans as well as vehicles have been set ablaze. Do you think that the more these incidents happen, the focus shifts from the core issue of protests? And then, of course, political meaning is read as to who's behind these violent protests to defame the agitation.
Well, it's very unfortunate it is very unfortunate who is doing it. It's the job of the law enforcing authorities to identify and prosecute such people. But in the name of that, to try and defame a peaceful agitation and a peaceful movement, a peaceful protest, that would be absolutely incorrect. In fact, those who are indulging in violence are actually playing into the hands of the government that wants to stop these protests, that wants to quell dissent in the country. And that is why we have been appealing for peaceful protests, and peaceful
Mr. Yechury,
protests
is that an inference?
are not being
Are you
allowed.
drawing an inference that these protesters are working at the behest of the government, or perhaps benefiting the government? Should I read that as an inference?
I'm saying, no, not as an inference, but I'm saying objectively they only assist the government in saying that no protest will be allowed. There is no inference being drawn, but anybody who sees the situation will know that these violent actions will only help the government in clamping down on these protests with a much firmer iron hand, which is exactly what the government wants to do.
All right, so that was my conversation with Sitaram Yechury of the CPM. Now let's talk about Gandhi Giri. And today has been a day of ironies, absolute irony of irony that is happening. On one hand, you have the Prime Minister who basically spoke at the commemoration of Mahatma Gandhi. This is the 150th year. And in that function, he said that we must imbibe Gandhian values. But on the ground, in Bengaluru, a Gandhi historian, Ramchand Guha, was detained and later released. And here at the protest site at Jantar Mantar, we saw a bit of Gandhi Giri, where protesters were holding Gandhi's image, Mahatma Gandhi's image, and were offering roses to the cops. Absolutely no violence here. There was violence in Lucknow and Ahmedabad, but here no violence at all. So where are Gandhian values being imbibed and practiced? This will be a question which will stay with all of us. All right, that's a wrap in this edition of Trending Tonight. That song, by the way, that you are hearing, and we'll let it breathe so that you can listen to it, is actually a very famous song. It's a poem that was written by poet Faiz Ahmad Faiz, sung in 1989 by revolutionary singer Iqbal Bano, and it found mention and prominence right here at this protest. The lyrics are, "Hum dekhenge."